The largest dam on Earth is not failing the way anyone expected. It is not cracking under the weight of the lake, it holds back. It is being eaten from below by the same river it was built to tame, and the wound is already deeper than the original engineers ever calculated it could go. Imagine you're standing on the crest of Kariba Dam in the middle of the night. The wind off the gorge cuts across the concrete. Below you, 6 spillway gates thunder like jet engines, shooting water into a blackness that no headlight can fully pierce. The vibration travels up through your boots. You feel it in your chest. On a screen inside a small monitoring building, green sonar lines flicker. Somewhere down there, 80 meters beneath the surface, the river is still cutting. And the people who designed this place in the 1950s never imagined it would cut this far. Lake Kariba stretches 5,400 square kilometers behind the dam, more than 180 billion cubic meters of water, the largest human-made reservoir on the planet by volume. The dam itself is 128 meters tall and 579 meters across, a double curvature concrete arch completed between 1955 and 1959 by a French firm that used the best technology of its time. It generates 1,626 megawatts, roughly 40% of all the electricity Zambia and Zimbabwe consume together. Copper smelters in the Zambian belt, steel mills in Kwekwe, the water pumps that keep Harare and Lusaka alive. Every major industrial heartbeat in both countries runs on power that begins right here. When the lights stay on in the capitals, when the factories keep running, when the mines keep producing, it is because Kariba is still holding. But the real story has never been the water above the crest. It has always been the water below. In 1959, the world called Kariba a triumph. African leaders and European engineers stood on the Finnish crest and spoke of progress that would last a century. The plunge pool at the base was expected to scour to a stable depth of roughly 30 meters and then stop. The rock beneath the dam, a fractured quartz mica gneiss, had been mapped as well as 1950s geology allowed. Grout was injected, anchors were set. The calculations looked sound on paper. By the 1970s, the first underwater surveys showed the pool was already deeper than the models had predicted. Engineers noted the anomaly, logged it, and moved on. The dam was still new. The reservoir was still filling. Power was still flowing. In the 1980s, more detailed dives flagged the same trend. The numbers were creeping upward, but not fast enough to trigger alarms in capital cities far away. In the 2000s, computer models began to show what the growing hole could do to the foundation if it kept enlarging. Those models stayed mostly inside engineering offices. The dam still looked solid from above. The lights still stayed on. Then came 2010. An underwater acoustic survey that year measured a 10-meter increase in plunge pool depth over the previous decade, the height of a 3-story building in a single sweep. The data landed on desks at the Zambezi River Authority like a quiet detonation. International reviewers were called in. In 2014, the World Bank, the African Development Bank, the European Investment Bank, and Sweden's SIDA approved a $294 million rehabilitation program. The plan had 2 clear goals: reshape the plunge pool by filling and grouting to stop the erosion, and refurbish the 6 spillway gates on the crest. Work started in 2016. By 2020, the gate upgrades were moving forward. The plunge pool work was not. The contractors discovered the erosion had cut deeper into weak bedrock than any pre-construction model had shown. Re-engineering added cost and time. In 2022, the Zambezi River Authority admitted the project had already slipped more than 3 years past its original schedule. In 2024, the reshaping was still unfinished. The official completion target had slid to 2028 at the earliest. Dr. Munyaradzi Munodawafa, chief executive of the Zambezi River Authority, wrote in the 2023 annual report that the rate of scouring could no longer be managed by monitoring alone. It had to be stopped. If the scour reached the downstream toe of the dam, he stated the structural integrity of the entire concrete arch would become indeterminate. In engineering language, indeterminate means the failure mode can no longer be calculated with certainty. The structure stops behaving like a predictable machine and starts behaving like a question no one can answer in advance. On a September morning in 2023, an inspection team lowered a yellow remotely operated vehicle into the plunge pool. The ROV's lights carved narrow tunnels through water that had not seen daylight in decades. On the dam crest, lead engineer Joyce Muchambaya sat at a wind-battered console watching the live feed on a stabilized screen. The sonar returned a clean reading at approximately 65 meters depth. A cavity 4.7 meters wide had formed directly beneath the concrete apron. She cross-checked the previous year's survey. The cavity had grown 30 centimeters in 12 months. She keyed the radio and told the site manager the same sentence that now hangs over every remaining repair schedule. The pool is not waiting for them. Imagine you're sitting beside her. The screen glows green. The sonar pings once every few seconds. You watch the cavity outline sharpen as the ROV makes another slow pass. 30 centimeters in 1 year during an active rehabilitation. You do the math in your head while the wind rattles the console. If the same rate holds, the numbers will look very different by 2028, and the rehabilitation is already years behind. Here's where the story most people tell themselves breaks open. The danger is not the dam wall suddenly splitting from top to bottom under the weight of the lake. The danger is not even the visible cracks that have appeared on the downstream face cracks. The 2016 Tractable Engineering Report documented as inconsistent with normal thermal movement. Those cracks are widening, and more than 200 sensors now track strain temperature, pore pressure, and crack aperture inside the concrete body. But the sensors can only measure what is already happening. They cannot predict what the next joint in the fractured foundation rock will do when water finds it. The foundation is not uniform. Parts are competent. Parts are jointed and variable in ways the 1950s mapping could not fully capture. Decades of operation, pore pressure cycling, and the growing plunge pool have revealed the rock to be less predictable than the original design assumed. When the scour reaches the downstream face water, under high pressure can begin to move through the weakest joints. That is the start of piping, a process in which water carries away tiny particles of rock, enlarging its own path. The path grows. The foundation loses support. The arch, which transfers its enormous load into the abutments on both sides, begins to experience movement. It was never designed to accommodate. Stress redistributes in ways that models can no longer bound with confidence. This is exactly how the St. Francis Dam failed in California in 1928. It is exactly how the Malpasset Dam failed in France in 1959. Both were double curvature arch dams. Both failed because unanticipated foundation movement turned a stable structure into an unpredictable one. Kariba is the largest double curvature arch dam ever built. The scale does not protect it. The scale only multiplies what happens when the foundation finally shifts. The real threat, then, is not the water you can see thundering over the spillway. It is the water you cannot see still carving, still widening the cavity that now sits only meters from the structural toe. While the public has been told the dam is safe, safe remains an operational definition. It means the monitoring data has not yet shown a runaway failure mode. It does not mean the structure has been returned to its original design margins. The plunge pool is still growing. The rehabilitation is still unfinished. The sensors are still transmitting numbers that keep getting worse. If the current rate of enlargement continues for another 10 years, the cavity could reach dimensions where even a moderate increase in spillway flow during heavy rains would accelerate the process dramatically. If a full reservoir collapse were ever to occur, modeling shows an initial surge reaching 70,000 cubic meters per second, more than 5 times the maximum flood routing capacity of Collaps downstream. Collaps would overtop within hours. The cascade would continue. The town of Kariba, population 29,000, sits only 3 kilometers below the dam and would be in the initial surge path. Communities such as Shirundu Kanyemba and Luangwa would see the flood wave arrive within 1 to 3 hours. The city of Tete in Mozambique, population 300,000, would be overwhelmed within roughly 10 hours. The sudden loss of 1,626 megawatts would trigger rolling blackouts, factory shutdowns, and food spoilage across roughly 25 million people in Zambia and Zimbabwe. A sequential failure of both Kariba and Collaps remains the worst-case freshwater disaster scenario currently modeled for sub-Saharan Africa. None of these outcomes are certain. The Zambezi River Authority continues to state that the risk of imminent structural failure is low. More than 200 sensors inside the dam body show no current evidence of runaway movement. The rehabilitation program, though delayed, is still funded and still moving forward, however slowly. The monitoring program is active. The authority is not hiding the existence of the plunge pool problem. It has reported on it publicly for years. What remains uncertain is whether the remaining work can outpace the erosion that is still happening tonight. What do you think? When you picture that ROV still descending into the same darkness next year, and the year after, while the cavity keeps widening by centimeters that add up to meters, do you trust the official statements that say, "The dam is safe for now"? Or do you keep coming back to the single sentence, "The lead engineer spoke into the radio. The pool is not waiting for us"? Tonight, the spillway jets are still cutting the rock. The sensors buried in the concrete are still logging their quiet data. The yellow ROVs are docked, but they will go back down. And above it all, 180 billion cubic meters of water continues to press against a foundation whose weakest joints are no longer theoretical. The river that was supposed to be controlled is still doing what rivers have always done, finding the path of least resistance, one grain of rock at a time. The question left hanging in the gorge is no longer whether the erosion can be stopped. It is whether the people downstream will still have time to move when the numbers on the screen finally stop being just numbers.